China is the world's largest polluter, but it's now vowed to go carbon neutral by the year 2060. President Xi Jinping has made the pledge to the United Nations General Assembly. He says that China will aim to reach peak greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the decade and then move on to achieve net zero emissions by 2060. Now, these are the most concrete steps announced by China to date.
人类不能再忽视大自然一次又一次的警告，沿着只讲索取不讲投入，只讲发展不讲保护，只讲利用不讲修复的老路走下去。
Mr. Xi has also renewed his support for the Paris Climate Accord, which the United States has abandoned. The deal commits nations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, confining a global temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. Mr. Xi says that the accord outlines the minimum steps needed to protect the Earth. But Mr. Xi hasn't detailed how China plans to meet those commitments. China currently accounts for more than a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and it also continues to invest in coal and other fossil fuels at home as well as overseas. Well, for a closer look, we're joined by Dr. Sam Geall. He's from China Dialogue and Chatham House. China is currently the world's largest polluter, but now we have this long-term sort of trajectory for China's decarbonisation goals. How realistic are they, though?
They're very realistic goals for China to commit to. The 2030 peak year was already committed at Paris in 2015, and it's clearly within range. And in fact, China could probably be more ambitious and could actually come in early on its peak year quite easily. The 2060 goal is new, and it's to be welcomed, particularly, as you said in your introduction, because it shows that China is willing to stay the course on Paris, even in the context of US retreat. So it does help to inject some more momentum into the kind of, hopefully, a drumbeat of new announcements that we'd like to see in the run-up to key climate talks next year in Glasgow in the UK, the COP26 UN talks. But there'll need to be a lot more detail before we can really see how this is going to be implemented.
Yeah, the devil is in the detail, as always, Dr. Geall. But is there any reason for us to believe that this is something realistically that can be achieved? Is there evidence to show us that China has been making strides in this direction?
Yeah, there's actually pretty strong domestic policy that fits with its climate pledges thus far to the UN talks. The 13th five-year plan from 2016 to 2020 set out energy intensity and carbon intensity targets that were consistent with its pledges to the UN, and it's on track to meet those targets. So the question isn't really whether it can achieve those targets. It's actually, firstly, whether they are ambitious enough, and also it's really now the onus is also on the rest of the world to show that they are willing to cooperate and also to up their ambition jointly, to ratchet up ambitions in advance of the talks, as well as on China to clarify exactly what kinds of mechanisms and rules it wants to put in place to meet those targets.
Dr. Geall, the United Nations has been putting out a lot of efforts to try to galvanise global action on climate action, but do you think that this is going to give a new lease of life to the Paris Climate Agreement? I mean, especially in light of the fact that the Trump administration has rejected it. They're going to pull out of it completely November the 4th.
Yeah, I mean, 2020 was hoped to be the so-called super year for the environment. We have the COP26 talks. We also have China hosting the Convention on Biological Diversity talks in Kunming that were scheduled also for the end of this year originally. And a combination of the rising US-China tensions, Trump's intransigence on environmental negotiations, and then the COVID-19 crisis has meant that a lot of these negotiations have been pushed into next year. There's been a sort of backburnering of environmental concerns due to fears about an economic recession. There's been rising global tensions. And all of these things mean a lot of the kind of global sustainability agenda looked like it was sort of threatening to be derailed. And, this is a hopeful sign that China is staying the course, and that, other countries and blocs, particularly the Europeans, the European Union, for example, and EU and China had a call last week where they agreed to work jointly on climate change, can cooperate to rebuild cooperation, particularly in the light of the post-COVID recovery.
Just a quick last question for you. Is this a big shift then? Are we seeing that China will be taking the lead, it seems, when it comes to climate change and addressing these issues?
In a sense, China has become a leader by default because it has such a large emissions profile, and because the US and China under Barack Obama had a very cooperative relationship on climate that underpinned a lot of the diplomacy around Paris. With the US withdrawal, China is in something of a leading position, and it also is the world's largest investor in renewable energy, largest deployer and producer of the technologies we need for the future in a more carbon-constrained world. But if China really wants to lead, it also needs to make commitments on reining in its coal-fired emissions, both domestically and in its financing overseas.
Okay, many thanks for your thoughts this evening, Dr. Sam Geall from China Dialogue and the Chatham House.